Doing?
Good, how are you?
Hey, excuse me, sorry.
Hey, Mike, hey, Rod.
Hey, how's it going?
Robin, QB, Rod.
How are you?
It's going.
Hot, how are you?
Hot.
Ah,
It wasn't too bad today.
yeah.
Hey, thank you all for
6:30
coming
at
in.
night, it's
Thanks so
only
much.
84. That's good.
You could be in California. It's in triple digits down there already.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I saw that.
Oh, that's terrible. I spent plenty of time in Southern California, so I know.
Zoom formats, this is just obnoxious. Okay, there we go. Well, I think we have enough people to get going here, so we'll go ahead and get started. As always, motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve the, second.
Okay, I got a motion and a second, so that's agreed to. Any amendments or clarifications to the previous meeting's minutes?
None.
None? Okay, then can I get a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve.
Second the motion,
Okay,
third the
that's agreed.
motion.
All right. So that's agreed to. And we are item number 2 on the agenda. This is a new thing we're doing and that we've discussed, but we want to provide right up front at the beginning of the meeting an opportunity for anyone in the meeting to make just any general comments, questions, comments, concerns for things that aren't on the agenda. Just go ahead, Tripti.
So, you know what, there's somebody else who's planning on joining. He reached out. So this is related to the 44th and Tejon property and the loss of the commercial space. His name is Sam. He plans on joining. If he joins or not, I told him to kind of bring this up as a concern from community, but it's about the loss of commercial in that space. I think he may join, but since I don't see him here, I know that there's this kind of concern from the community about what do we do about this? So I'm putting it out there, for him. And I think we may need to decide if there's any avenue we have.
Yeah, so I guess we could kind of encompass that under the DO8 overlay discussion. I have it on the agenda as DO8 overlay discussion, but I think really we're talking more broadly than that, specifically this issue of loss of our commercial spaces. But if that member comes later, then we can interrupt things to let them speak.
His name is Sam, in case I drop off or something. His name is
Okay. Yeah, okay. Any others? I see Jason and Richard on the call here. If you wanted to say anything, now's your opportunity. Going once, going twice. Okay, well then we'll go ahead and proceed. But just to reiterate, that's for anyone who watches this video later. This is ongoing, going to be going in the future. Your opportunity to bring items up to the committee, and it's also it's helpful for us to identify issues that we can put on the agenda later in the year to talk about more in depth. So this is kind of the opportunity to do that as well. With that. We will go into reports and quick updates. I don't see Naomi Grunditz. Was she on vacation? I can't remember.
I can't remember, but she may be. She's getting married, and I can't
that's
remember
right.
if she said she was going to be here on this particular call. However, do we get? They've started putting the land use updates within the monthly newsletter, right? So they've kind of changed how they're doing stuff, and I don't know, Matthew, Bobby, how we're going to capture that and house it like we were trying to, with the newsletter. Is this in our folder?
This is it. It's in our folder.
Okay, great.
So I think they're adding it to the email newsletter as well, but they're still making these slides by themselves. So they
Okay.
still have both. Either way, but we can discuss how we want to put that in our monthly email newsletter update. But that's in there. But since we're just here, Tripti, I'll let you go first with the conservation overlay, and then if Naomi comes in, we can have her talk. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
sure. So the conservation overlay had a info session in front of the planning board. So this is not a decision-making aspect. We're not presenting, but it's an informational thing. And so this is kind of our preview to them and also our opportunity to understand what their issues may be. And actually, Rod is actually on that group with me. Rod, did you listen in on?
No,
Okay.
I
And that's not a
didn't get a
problem.
chance.
In case you had, I wanted to make sure that, we let you kind of give your perspective as well. So, there were 7 planning board members that were present. 5 kind of made comments that were relevant. I wrote them down. I shared them with the working group. And a couple of them, one was, is this going to stop duplexes? Actually, the answer is no, it won't. And we have some compelling information and slides. So most of the questions that were raised, I think we have responses to. But again, this wasn't the full presentation from the council office or CPD, but this info session. So we kind of got an idea of what the concerns were. So one concern was the issue of, is this going to stop duplexes from being built? I don't think we have to worry about that one. Another one was kind of an equity play, and it was about, well, who wants these regulations and who does it affect? That's one. The other part of the equity aspect, and this came from Gosha Kung. And if you don't know who Gosha Kung is, she's really active. She started Walk Denver, that eventually became Denver Street Partnership. Now she's on the planning board. Her and her husband are architects. So she's really well versed in the space in general. But one of her concerns was on the equity. If we don't allow, in a sense, speculative development, does that then push speculative development to a different neighborhood? Valid point. I mean, I don't know, frankly, that is something that we should worry about as much as the city should worry about. Another thing that came up in that kind of same conversation was, and with Gosha, why isn't the city taking, if this is so important, if preservation and context sensitive is so important, why isn't the city doing more kind of on a holistic thing? And why is it this onesie twosie with these overlays that we're dealing with? And at least Amanda's comments, and response there was that multiple other neighborhoods are looking at what either we're doing, Harkness, Tennyson with the DO8 overlay, but that some of these things that are out there and adopted are being looked at by other neighborhoods to figure out whether it makes sense for them to adopt them. So it's not true that, other areas aren't looking at them, they're looking at it. But, is the city doing something holistically to, maybe not, I don't know. That's kind of hard to say. But some the comments we heard, I put them on paper, I sent them out to the working group. I think we have an argument on most of them. The issue, another one that came up was the brick. And the brick being, is brick too much of a design guideline and it shouldn't be part of the overlay? And this is interesting, which is most people are somewhat misinformed that the conservation overlay does dictate materials, so brick as a material is something that you can incorporate into conservation overlay. However, the city has never looked at materials as part of conservation, and they've punted kind of to design overlay. So, it's kind of the chicken and the egg, like because the city only has adopted it in this context, is that where it belongs? But in reality, it can be part of the conservation overlay, at least from the standpoint of the code. The code allows materials regulation as part of the conservation overlay. So that's an interesting aspect, because the city hasn't done it, and they've decided to move it towards design. We're not moving in the design overlay. We're talking about conservation overlay. So that was another, that was actually brought up by the chair, the planning board chair, and he did not know that it actually belongs, it can be part of conservation overlay, where he needed to go look that up himself. So I think, and so the overlay working group has like 4 or 5 meetings set up over the next month and a half. So we are now moving forward to now actually getting in front of the planning board as a hearing, not just an informational session. And it moves to them. And from that point, it moves to city council. That's where we are. We're at least 2 months away from any major development other than the working group.
Any questions for Tripti on that?
Sorry, yeah, I think, what do we have, 5 current meetings established or set up for,
Something like that.
it's something like every week for the next 5 weeks. something.
Correct. It is just to now keep going. We are at the point that we are just going to keep moving and forging ahead. Again, I think most of the comments that were made, we have responses to, and I'll have to go back and look to see if there was anything that we didn't. But in this info session, everything that's been modeled, every research and data point that's been collected, this wasn't the place to be able to present that. This was a place for a summary in front of planning board. And actually, a couple of people, two people on the planning board, and this was encouraging actually, 2 people on the planning board, kind of liked the disincentive of adding brick or adding cost, the disincentive that may add to scrapes not happening. And that maybe it's a good strategy to create disincentives, from scrapes. So there was that. The planning board chair also made comments of that he liked the disincentive away from scrapes. And also that what we were talking about was preserving the context, the prevailing pattern, that this kind of did both. So it'll be interesting to see, what happens actually at planning board. But I thought it was more encouraging and less problematic than I anticipated.
Well, that's good.
I had some technical difficulties tonight, so I missed the first couple minutes of the meeting. Did you mention the comment in planning board about wheelchair accessibility? And
I did not.
did the group, when you met the other night, have any cool ideas on how to address that?
Well, actually, this group. Okay, so let me talk about that. Thank you for reminding me. That might have been the 3rd comment, a significant comment that 2 board members were like, "Yeah, and what about that?" The question was, with our porch requirement and kind of the base plane and kind of a height on the base plane, would that be a problem for ADA? So to that, the Harkness Heights bungalow, also dictates porches, okay? And Amanda and team, for council, when they were working on this, they worked with a couple of organizations locally, asked for guidance, and there was no guidance. And there is nothing in the code that says you got to do this to accommodate. Different than multi-unit places where they have to either have an elevator or a ramp or something, but on a single family home or a duplex, a ramp isn't required. Now, having said that, no guidance, and Harkness had the same issue. Harkness actually passed. We're in a similar situation. But I think in our overlay and just overall, if there is a need, exceptions are going to be available. So ADA is definitely one of those things where an exception could be made to any of those requirements to accommodate ADA. But from the standpoint of guidance code, nothing exists and we don't have anything. So thank you, Jonathan. That was one of the comments on the ADA piece, but it's not new because it came up on Harkness as well. But there is no answer to that. Like there is no guidance that says, what will we do? How could we modify this? But again, I think we're going to be able to get past that piece.
Okay.
Go ahead.
iPhone, did you have a question for Trupti? I see your hand raised there. Your digital hand anyway. iPhone 2 KC, was that a question?
They are still muted.
I don't know if that's Sam. Sam, is that you?
It's me. There's a good project, a house on Alcott Street between 46th and Scott Place on the west side of the street. We looked at it when we were talking about roof form. It's got the shed roof, and they retrofitted the house and took off the front entrance and then oriented the entrance to the side so that they could get a long enough run for the front sidewalk to be ADA accessible.
Yeah, you showed that picture a long time ago. We all looked at that picture. I remember that.
Yeah.
And Catherine,
It's great treatment. It stays, I think we can point to that and show this is a project that meets the spirit and intent of the conservation overlay, and is a way to achieve the ADA standards and the character conservation intent of the overlay.
and I think the other point, and Catherine, please jump in. I think the other point is to make sure that planning board understands that exceptions to some hardship are always going to be eligible. Whether, I mean, to the point that you could do this off a side and still maintain the front as is, that is guidance. But in general, let's say you've got a property that you can't do that to for whatever reason. The point is that exceptions are going to be available for hardships such as ADA.
Yeah, I don't know how you prioritize hardships. I think that's slightly subjective and difficult to sort of quantify ahead of time until you see it in front of you.
Well, let me take that. We in our overlay, we don't talk about hardships. I believe we do indicate exceptions are possible. And I think that's the important piece, which is exceptions can be made where it's required. And this would be a good example of why an exception would be made.
And I think you would be hard pressed to find someone who's going to scrape a home, build a 2-story home, and needs a wheelchair accessible home. Who
Right.
isn't already heading to the BOA because they need an elevator or they
Right.
need something else. The developers just don't build ADA homes unless it's for a
Right.
specific unit.
Right.
And that's exactly, and for folks on the planning board, like 2 of the architects bringing this up, they actually know that. They do know that, they should know that, they design homes and they know the code. So to act like, this somehow is going to be a problem, more of a problem that may already exist for these folks is kind of
Well, and I think the other thing to point out too is that someone in a wheelchair might want a front porch to sit out on that they access from the inside of their house. So the front porch requirement in and of itself doesn't actually prevent ADA accessibility. Those are really, I mean, I can see why they think it might be a problem, but it really isn't.
Right. Exactly. I agree. I mean, I think sometimes people play the devil's advocate to find kind of that scenario where an exception is needed and this somehow, this would be restrictive. But I do believe that the overlay does allow exceptions anyway. So I think we're going to be fine in that space. I think the biggest challenge is going to be brick. And I say that because, you know, folks think that it's a design guideline. Folks think that it adds, you know, expense. And I think it's on us to demonstrate that whatever those concerns are, that, you know, maybe they're minimal, you know, and, you know, a $20,000 on $1 million isn't really the expense. You know, it's not going to stop
Well,
a
that's
project.
what that's what I was getting at, is the subjectivity of hardship. You know, on one hand, I think most reasonable people would say that you know, an ADA accessible ramp is a reasonable hardship that would allow for some accommodations. Although a financial hardship because brick is more expensive, perhaps, if someone made that argument, is not necessarily a hardship that would preclude that person from, you know, putting on brick.
But it's on us to, I mean, so what's good about this kind of info session is getting an idea of the objections and the concerns they have. And then it's on back to our working group and, you know, the CPD who's helping us move this along, and council, to show and demonstrate that all of these concerns are minimum or non-existent, or, you know, and so that was kind of the value here of listening in on this. But I think we're in a good shape, unless somebody else has listened to this, think we actually have a problem. And then, you know, if that's the case, we should talk.
Any other questions for Tripti on the conservation overlay? Okay, well, we will wrap it up there. We're always happy to take questions as always and follow up. I don't see Naomi Grunditz here. So we'll go ahead and kind of pass over Council 1, District 1 updates. It's hyperlinked in the agenda, so feel free to go through and take a look at it. If you have any questions, they're fairly responsive, so just feel free to email them about that. We'll go ahead and move into the bylaws discussion under our final review items. Before we actually get into anything, I just wanted to open up this for the group. Hyperlinked into the agenda there is kind of all the written comments we got, and then as well as down on the bottom is kind of some of the discussion that went on with the land use committee about various aspects of the bylaws that weren't brought up in any of the written comments we received. But feel free to look through that. It's, as I said, it's hyperlinked in there.
Hey, so Bobby, yeah, you know, because it's kind of hard for folks to be like catching up and being able to contribute as if they already read it. I mean, if you can, are there any points that are still open, problematic, you know, in that we need to discuss as a group? I know Catherine sent some written comments just a day ago, maybe 2 days ago. So have those been incorporated and addressed? And do we need to address anything here?
Yeah, so Catherine sent in a number of comments, and I'll let Catherine speak to those here in a second. But as for, you know, everything we'd received in the written comments and the surveys and what we had discussed as a committee, there isn't anything outstanding that we haven't discussed several times now. So I think most of that has been addressed. Now, Catherine did bring up a number of things the other day. I was able to incorporate about one of them. I rejected quite a few of them, not because I didn't necessarily agree with them, but because kind of the current language we had come to was kind of a compromise, and I didn't want to upset that at the last second. You know, everyone's free here to continue deliberation and you know, accept more comments as they come in. The way it was just formatted on the Google Doc, I wanted to take it off of there so it didn't confuse people this evening. But Catherine, do you want to speak to any of your comments? I'll go ahead and open it up to you.
Sure. I think my biggest comment, it has to do with whether or not people who serve on the land use committee are residents of Sunnyside. I found it a bit concerning that, you know, when I read through it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but potentially the entire land use committee could be comprised of people who don't actually live in Sunnyside, the way it's currently written. And that, I found that pretty concerning, particularly when I looked at that against how members could be selected, would be selected from here on out. And it seems to me that a very small group of people would have control over who has a say in the land use committee and how the decisions are made, and that potentially it could be made by people who don't live here, but maybe have a business or own property. So I found that concerning, and I think there should be, you know, maybe 1 or 2 seats reserved for people who don't actually live in Sunnyside. But there are big issues that are coming through the land use committee, and I've been very troubled by things like the Fox Park bridge connection and the lack of transparency, the lack of follow through on commitments that have been made to us, the lack of notice to residents. And so those sorts of things really make me very nervous when I read that the representation on the land use committee could be people who don't actually live here.
Yeah, so I'll speak to this a little. What I originally proposed was, I think, requiring either 1/3 or 2/3 of the committee to be residents that actually lived here. There was a lot of debate and discussion about that. I think what, you know, the committee kind of came to at the end was that, what are we really trying to guard against? And that was a conflict of interest. And so the conflict of interest provision would account for something like that. I mean, I think that's true. I think there's also, I think Catherine does have a good point, though, that, you know, if it's a committee representing the neighborhood, a substantial portion of the committee should be residents. That's not to say we don't want a business owner or a property owner that doesn't necessarily live here. But I mean, I guess if anybody else has any thoughts, you know, go ahead. We can make amendments. So, you know, I'm open to it.
So I'm gonna make a couple of points for the benefit of other folks on here who, you know, aren't aware of kind of how we've been operating. So in Sunnyside's, you know, kind of the higher level, the organization and our bylaws, we consider anybody who owns, lives, or operates a business in Sunnyside as a member. By that, I mean they're included and eligible to cast votes on things that we may ask, or you know, whose comments are going to be incorporated into the decision making. So that's one level, right? Which is everybody who lives, owns, or operates a business is a member. That's that. The other part is, you know, in terms, and Catherine, you kind of alluded to, like, a small group of people are making decisions here. Now, this is bigger than we've had before, right? And we're trying to move towards something representative. And I do think it's important. And maybe that 2/3, I'm not against the 2/3 residency requirement. So you live here. I think that's relevant. And we can get back to that as a potential amendment. But in terms of a small group of people making a decision, one of the challenges we have is, and how we've operated before, is whoever shows up casts a vote. And that is as problematic, if not more, for coming to a decision that is based in guidelines and, some level of objectivity. And what we've done before is whoever shows up at the meeting casts a vote, and those votes are counted. That too is problematic because a lot of times only people who object and have a problem show up to these calls. We have 9 people on here right now, right? And we'd love for this to be 50, but that's not where we are. So we do need to have a group of people whose role is to be making decisions based on objective guidelines that ideally are ones that we move through the neighborhood so that we have a mandate for the decisions that we're making. But we're moving towards that. But I don't know that if we right now, if the choice is between having a group of 7 or 9 or whatever that number is, group of people who 2/3, let's say, live here and are following the issues, are spending the time it takes to kind of learn about the issues, them voting versus whoever shows up at a call, because that's problematic from the standpoint of packing a vote, right? If I was a developer and I knew that all I had to do was bring people to this call and vote for me, I could do that. And we want to discourage that.
I agree with that, Trupti. I completely understand what you're saying there. And I agree with entirely with the spirit of what you're saying. But I think what I'm trying to say is, as apathetic as people are, that there are only 9 people on this call, I could see, over time, our land use committee being packed with development interests that may or may not really care what the quality of life is like in Sunnyside. So if all of the people on 46th knew that there could potentially be an increase of 15,000 vehicles per day on 46th Avenue, we might have some more people showing up. And, I want to make sure that who's sitting on the community lives here. They're walking the streets in the neighborhood. They're talking to neighbors. They sense what it's like when something changes in the neighborhood. They're on the ground. They're hearing what people are saying. I really, and it's not to be anti-development or anti-business owners, but to preserve that the decision making that happens. And I do agree that the decision making should be tied to things that we've agreed to, whether or not, and, coming from a person like me with very strong opinions, I get what you're trying to do with that. And I think that makes perfect sense that at some point, strong opinions can't rule the day. It has to be what we've agreed to as a community.
Right.
But I want it to be the people who live here representing us, not necessarily people, because we are a very choice neighborhood with a lot of development potential. If the development community gets wind that they could potentially pack our land use committee, that concerns me deeply.
Okay, I agree. And you know what? I think we've bounced around in the past, stuff like limiting the number of developers' interests, or a developer who may, and don't get me wrong, a developer and their perspective is of value to this committee. And it's also of value in that broader sense of, they may have a solution that is good. So it's not as if we're
Right.
anti whatever, but
And
maybe
participation is different from decision making.
no, absolutely. But I mean, so, I get where you're going. And I think for this group right now, and really for the bylaws themselves, do we want to have some limits on non-resident individuals who serve on the decision-making body, as well as limits on developers who serve on this body? I for one, am for both of those limits in general. And Bobby, I can't remember, like, when we talked about the 2/3 being residents, what was the challenge to that from maybe the committee, or what was the pushback that we might have gotten where we got rid of it?
So I'll answer your question, then let Rod speak. There's a discussion of, as the committee changes and the composition changes, you wouldn't necessarily want to restrict someone that would be a good member simply because they weren't a resident, such as a business owner or otherwise. And then there was also the discussion of, I think that got back to the conflict of interest piece, and it could be solved that way. But I think that's mostly what kind of the discussion was.
Yeah, I do remember
there were kind of opinions on both sides. Rod, go ahead.
I agree with all that's been said. I just had a couple of questions. And first, has this ever been a problem with a developer ever getting on or trying to pack the committee?
And not here, but in Highlands. This actually happened in Highlands, and they moved from everyone who shows up has a vote to no. The voting body.
No. I meant, I understand, like, showing up at a meeting and packing the house. I get that. And I think we've addressed that because,
Right.
It's just the committee. So we've nixed that. I meant developers actually getting on neighborhood organization committees and packing the committees to then start developing the neighborhood they want them to. I have never heard of that. That is an awful lot of
Work.
I
Yeah.
get it. If you're a big developer, and I get it that Sunnyside was never like a target, like geographic location that, we may be getting to that point where it's this, honey spot of a neighborhood that developers are going to have. So I agree with all that's been said. That I think the first thing we've done that is the best thing is you have to recuse yourself. You can't from any decision-making processes that you're directly involved in. So that's going to discourage, I think, developers wanting to spend the inordinate amount of time to get on the committee right away when they know that their own personal interests, they wouldn't be able to vote on them within the committee. They'd have to recuse themselves from that. If it was like, say, a developer wanted to get on the committee because they had a property they wanted to develop, they couldn't vote on that approval or any of the decisions that were made. So that's going to discourage the developers right away. That being said, I think, maybe we do. I think having 2/3 of the people, like a rule that says 2/3 must be residents, might limit it. I mean, we have a hard time getting 9 people that aren't residents. I mean,
Yeah,
from
but
everywhere.
I think at expecting the majority to actually live here is not terrible. I mean, where we are right now, everyone lives here except Bill. Bill's got a business. Everybody else that we already have, and Lucas is not even here, most people who do reach out to me to participate and do stuff in the neighborhood or get involved with SUNY do that from that right place. But there is this other piece, right? You could get packed with realtors. And again, they are not a developer, but they have a bias towards,
Exactly.
something that benefits
Right.
them. And
But-
so I think we do need to determine what's the right.
And what I was going to say, Trudy, is I think 2/3 is a bit much. But if we were to say the majority of the members must be residents, then that way you can only get on the board if the majority votes you on. So that if a majority of them are residents, that should maintain control and people will have the ability to vote on new members. And if they decide that a member from outside the community is a good thing, it's got to be more than half. And then that way, if the committee is 7 or 9, it's either 4 or 5 in those two situations. Of the members must be residents. I'm not making a formal motion. I'm just saying that, 2/3 is an awful lot. Going below the 50% mark potentially would give non-resident members control of the board for vote, you know, if they were more than 50. So maybe you say 50, because that's kind of, we've already got that established as a controlling factor
I-
in voting on members.
I would,
Go ahead, Catherine.
I think that the way it's written, there's so much focus on controlling, you know, who and how people get on the board, on the committee. And it just, you know, this is a registered neighborhood organization. It should be designed to be cycling people through, getting more people to participate. And I worry about getting things consolidated to a very small group of people, it becoming very kind of cliquey. And, you know, if you don't agree with who's making the decisions, you're not going to be able to participate and be part of the decision-making process. And that power could get consolidated in a way that keeps the average Sunnyside resident from being able to really participate. I just, it's a neighborhood organization, and there, you know, development interests, property owners, everyone should be encouraged to participate, but who makes the decisions should really be a broad cross-section of people from the neighborhood as much as possible, and especially if there are divergent voices. And so these are my concerns, and I hope we maybe spend a little more time thinking about this before we approve these bylaws, because I think there are some potentially unforeseen, you know, problems in a desire to try to, you know, get people participating on a regular basis and able to make decisions. I mean, I know showing up has been difficult, but
Catherine, could you clarify for a bit? So would you be for the way it was before, where everyone that shows up to a meeting can vote? Is that what you're saying?
not. Absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Not.
I'm sorry. I misunderstood like the last part of what you were saying there then.
Right. Right.
I'm
I'm kind of saying I understand why you would be confused by that. What I'm saying though is that there's kind of a fine line between trying to control the board or the committee and it being a free for all. And I think either way, like too much control and free for all are both, I think, you know, different sides of the same coin. So I think there's a real, you know, trick here. And how do you get the right kind of participation, but make sure that there are divergent voices heard at the table? My concern though is that I'm okay with a lot of disagreement, so long as it's the residents, the people who live here, who are affected by any decisions that are made. We're the ones who are dealing with the consequences of that. You know, an increase of 15,000 vehicles on 46th Avenue is going to be felt by Sunnyside residents, people who live here. And, you know, those are the kinds of decisions that I want made by Sunnyside residents, not by people who don't have to face the impact of the kinds of decisions that this group is going to make.
Totally, I mean, I'm on board with everything, what everybody's saying. I think we're aligned on our concerns, and the question really is, well, you know, given kind of all of this either uncertainty or what can go wrong or unintended consequences, we still have to make decisions and move forward, right? So we talk about just minimizing the risks that we're worried about, right? So if number one, you know, we have a larger group than we did before. We had 2 people before. That were the chair and the co-chair. There was no committee. So building the committee, that's number one. That is, you know, mitigating issue of control, power, bias, all those things. Another one that you're bringing up is that the voices that need to be prominent, or maybe even majority, are folks who actually live here and not others. So that's kind of a second piece. So having a larger group is one. We're working on that. adding in some controls on those numbers, that's kind of what we're talking about here. I'm for some of those controls, and whether it's 50% have to be residents, but 50% residents does not ensure that we don't have a bias or a vacuum. That gets to this, how do we have divergent or diversity or, you know, perspectives that are different? For instance, one is we don't want all landowners or property owners. We want some renters, you know, we want voices that are different. But, you know, beyond landowners and property owners and adding a business and adding a development individual, I think that adds to that perspective that is a little bit more comprehensive than if you had all homeowners, you know, around an issue. So, you know.
Well, I think you guys are both saying, because Catherine had said she wanted diversity as well, too. We need all sorts of voices coming to the table, and disagreements are good, done in a, you know, proper way. I think that all of this lends itself, and it's better addressed with the culture of the committee and how we set this up. Because let's face it, we're already fighting an uphill battle with this. The people that Catherine is concerned about are going to be more educated, more vested in any of these things than most neighborhood residents are. People just live their lives, they do their daily thing, you know, and that's beholden on us as a committee and as a, you know, as the SUNY board to engage with our residents and make sure that they're informed and they're concerned about all this kind of stuff. I mean, that's the way we keep this being about the residents, is how we engage with the community, because we're already fighting a population of people that would be coming to us, if you consider it a fight, that are already going to be, you know, like I already said, like more vested, more educated, more power behind it, because they've got an interest in getting through what they're trying to get through that may not be in the best interest of the neighborhood. So, you know, rather than making rules about how we vote on this, all this stuff, and how we block these people out, I think, you know, let's focus on how we get more people involved. That's the way we keep that balance and make sure that we're doing the things that are best for the neighbors.
I think that's a good aspiration. And I worry, though, when I look at the rest of the bylaws and see things like specifically calling out the next step study and the whatever the city is going to recommend for this Fox Park Bridge, when they haven't done the outreach to get people to the table to talk about this, and they haven't followed through on the commitments they made about the kinds of workshops that they were going to hold with the community and how they were going to provide notice to the most affected residents to get them to the table. They didn't even do that. We still don't even have the traffic study yet, and yet the bylaws are referencing the traffic study as like something that the land use committee is going to be held to implement, and we haven't even seen it yet. It's not a document that's adopted by city council. So you know, I have some serious questions about what is being committed to here and whether or not it's going to achieve. I think your aspirations are great, Rod, but
I get it. We live in an imperfect world. And I think some of that too, Catherine, is that you know, all of this is talking about multiple, it's not just this land use committee and how we're set up. I mean, you've pointed on a few things right there. It's faults and problems with the city itself, you know, which quite frankly, we don't have a lot of control over as the land use committee. But so it's on multiple levels that there are definitely problems that need to be addressed. And I just don't know if it's possible for us to address or to handle all those within our committee, you know, because those are problems that a lot of that is outside of our scope and ability.
What if could we have a position on the committee that is like representing the development community, you know, or development planning, architecture? So someone who may not live here, but who has some sort of interest in the community. They're, you know, maybe it's an architecture firm that's doing a lot of work in the neighborhood, or It's a developer that, has projects that they want to do in the community. So they do have some vested interest, and they've shown goodwill in terms of reaching out to people or whatever. But maybe we have a seat that's dedicated for that, so that there's quite a bit of transparency to say, this is a seat that we're reserving on our land use committee to show we want to work with the development community.
I think that's fair.
But that, the rest of the seats are residents, because this is a neighborhood organization.
So I'll say a couple of things. Catherine, thank you for pointing out the next step study thing. I did cross
Right.
that off of the bylaws. That's not on there anymore because that isn't actually a city approved study. It was done by the developer. So that one's gone. But, I'm going to go ahead and I'll make a motion, but I'm going to explain what I'm talking about here. I think the point is apt that it's not unreasonable to expect the majority of the people on this committee to be residents of the committee, or even a supermajority.
Yep.
And to Rod's point of majority versus supermajority, I'm just wary of that, because that takes one person to corrupt to where then the process is kind of overtaken by outside forces. And to the other point Rod made, no, we haven't necessarily seen this before where developers take over, but what we have seen before with RNOs is that a group of people tries to come in that are kind of single issue people. They want to do one thing in the neighborhood, they want to get it done, and then kind of blow things up and leave. And so something like that could occur too, not necessarily with development, but I can see it happening. And I don't think, and let me say another thing. So we have positions outlined here in the bylaws that, chair, leads, secretary, and general members. However, we don't actually say it must be this many people, or it must be 7, or it must be 9. So we do need to have these positions. Some of them may sit vacant from time to time, but if there really is a good business person that doesn't live in the community or whatever, and we want them on the board, we can get them on the board. We just need to grow the size of the board so that there's still 2/3 of the people who are residents. So we could have 1, 2, 3, or even 4 non-resident people on the board, but the board would just be bigger. Now, at a certain point, it becomes obnoxious, but I don't think that needs to be specifically outlined here. I think we can deal with that and use common sense when it comes up. 20 people on a board is too much, obviously. We'll use common sense. Going over 13 or something like that would be a little ridiculous. But I think what we were originally talking about with the problem was that some really nice person who's a business owner and would be really great to have on the committee couldn't be on the committee because we have these 2/3 resident requirement. I just don't really see that being an issue that we couldn't overcome and address at that time.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree, and I agree with that. I just, was wondering, what is that? We all are, except for Bill, everybody lives here, right? Right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Yeah,
okay.
and I
So
also, just one point. I think, the neighborhood includes businesses, because we're a neighborhood and there's some businesses here and they're part of the neighborhood. So I struggle with these limitations unless it gets packed or overwhelmed. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, Rob, it's more of a cultural thing and about allowing who in to the group or not to be in the group. And it's about value and participation and position, and not necessarily, are they a business owner? Are they a property owner? Are they a resident? Are they a renter? Are they a homeowner? I don't know. I just think that's a little too detailed for bylaws to get into.
I agree that bylaws may not be the right place to be thinking about some of this, right? However, we have a similar challenge. What Matthew just talked about, Bobby, sorry, talked about, having single issue folks, people who only care about one thing and they're going to join the board just for that, and then they're out. You know, on the board, on the Sunnyside board, you know, one of the ways we're addressing that is kind of vetting people, right? Kind of making sure folks are in it for the right reason, kind of that they're buying onto the general mission, not their own one thing. And same reason why we don't want to take a vote of who shows up, because people show up when they're mad and they want or don't want something, and they'll call their friends. So on the board, we go through kind of a vetting interview process. And part of that is to make sure that nobody is showing up for the wrong reasons. And I think on we talked about this at the executive committee meeting, saying, how does one join the board? And they have to be nominated, you know, and that you're nominated after somebody has a chance to sit down and talk to you about what we do, what we're trying to do, why you want to join, right? And that nomination should happen through existing board members, and the existing board members should be doing it for the right reasons. So, you know, that vetting and interview, that Q&A, explaining the culture, what we want, what we don't want, that should be something that all of us kind of understand. And when somebody approaches us or wants to join, that we're all able to kind of share that culture and what we're trying to achieve here with them, to vet folks, you know, who should and should not be on this board. And I think, you know, I think we're going to have to incorporate that into how we get to that point of having this diverse group of people with divergent voices and it being representative. But we do have to be intentional. And I think a business and or someone from the development sphere, I think it's important for them to be there. Not if we only had 3 people, but when we're talking about 9 people, I think 1 for businesses, 1 for development, you know, would be good for all of us, because there's maybe something we don't think about, and it would be a perspective that's valuable for all of us to come to that decision making, you know, to hear those. So how, you know, how we kind of operationalize that is what I think we're talking about. But having room for a business and or a developer, but the developer could be a consultant and not on this board, and that is also something we can think about.
One of the things that I keep thinking about is what happened when there were all of those conflicts with Jimmy Nig, and
Yes.
the loud music, the obscenities, all the stuff that the immediate neighbors really showed up and complained about. And, you know, I think that's really indicative. People do show up when there's a problem to state their objections to it, because it affects their quality of life. And, you know, so I want to make sure that the composition of the decision-making body is sensitive to the quality of life issues for people who live here, for people who are trying to sleep here, for people who are trying to, like, you know, raise children here. And, you know, there are many things that will impact them down the road. And if you don't live here and you're making decisions, it's easy to make decisions when you don't have to face the consequences of those decisions. And so I think a board that's very sensitive to, you know, any decision that's being made, how that's going to affect people that they walk past and see on a day-to-day basis, is very important to me. So I am strongly in favor of saying that it has to be a supermajority, needs to be residents, but that there may be seats assigned for business owners or development community, but that those are very transparent as, you know, seats that are not resident seats on the committee.
You know, does somebody want to make a motion about the supermajority versus majority, you know, being residents, either own or live here, period, residence.
Yeah,
Does
I don't care if
anyone-
it's renter or owner. I'm not trying to
Yeah,
say.
yeah. So
Oh, I know, I know.
I'll go ahead and make the motion here. I'm entering the text into the chat box. And I'm gonna try and keep it as simple as possible here. So just to add a second sentence to 3.1.
Second
And
that.
leave it as that language.
I'll second the motion of a supermajority being residents.
Okay, any further? So I'll go ahead and open it up now for a discussion on the motion. Jonathan?
I have a couple questions that I think would address this, but I'm not sure. My first, and these are hopefully yes, no questions, because I just don't know the answers. Does SUNY, as a neighborhood association, not as land use committee, require that you be a resident, renter, or business owner?
To be on the
join?
board, yes, you do need to be a member. And a member of the community is someone who lives, owns real property, or owns a business. You cannot live in West Highland, not have any property here or a business here and get on our board. So you have to be a member. But here we're talking about not just a member, because Modus is a member, okay?
Right.
And business owners are a member. But here we're saying that we want to actually put additional limits on, the residential aspect of it. And I think it's valid because on the land use side, we deal with more consequential stuff in this committee than we do as a board, period. So the fact that we're discussing this here and kind of deliberating and saying here, we might want a residential requirement, I think is valid here, even though the board says you're a member.
But renters cannot be on the board?
No, renters can. You
Okay.
live, you own, or operate a business. You're all.
No, I
members.
mean, a residential renter, person that rents their.
Yes, no, yeah, no.
Okay.
That means they live here. They live
Yeah,
here.
okay. I thought I didn't, I just wanted to, yeah.
Yeah, no, you live here, you own real property here, or you operate a business here. And that you're all members from the standpoint of SUNY.
And does SUNY require everyone on this board on land use to be a member of SUNY?
Actually, it should, yes. We don't require that. We don't talk about requirements of committees as much as we talk about requirements of the board of directors.
Right.
However, we're talking about creating bylaws for this committee. So I think this is an open conversation, but I actually agree that everybody needs to be a member. If you're not a member, so you live somewhere else, but you really want to help us, then you're a volunteer, you're a consultant, you're a resource. You probably shouldn't be on the decision-making body.
Because if the SUNY bylaws require that everyone on land use be a member, then we've at least already got it down to resident, renter, business,
Landowner.
Yes.
rather
But
than
you still run into
rather
the
than
problem.
like random employee of a.
Correct. I think
And-
that's easy. I think we can adopt that.
Are we technically / legally allowed to ask people who want to join our business, where do you live and what is your job?
Where do you live or what your affiliation to SUNY is something we can ask. I don't see any reason to not. And if our bylaw says anybody who's on the board of directors, is a member. Now, we have not expected that from committee members. Because, for instance, we have volunteers who may help us on events who don't live here, but they're willing to put up yard signs, they're willing to take on a task, they're willing to show up. They're a events committee member, like this being a land use committee member. However, what events does is not consequential in the same way as what land use does. So events committee does not have bylaws, but land use, we're talking about bylaws. So here we could add on that you must be a member, number one, but additionally, we're saying that we're then limiting to a 2/3 of live here. So you own or rent, you live here. Not even you own property here, you live here.
Right, because what Bobby wrote there, residence means you live here. So if you
Right.
lived in Highlands but owned my neighbor's house, you
Nope,
could be in SUNY, but you couldn't be
Do
on.
not be on the land use. committee.
correct.
Okay,
I like that.
I think that's what we're saying here.
I like it. I just want to make sure we're super clear.
No, thank you, thank you. I think that's valid.
Catherine, does this work towards addressing your concern about random people getting on the board?
My concern is that it's the majority of the people that are on the board are residents.
So right now, we're saying that 2/3, a supermajority, will have to be residents
For this committee,
for this committee.
not Sunny board. but
Right.
Land use committee. Is
For
that,
land committee, that is my concern.
are you good with that? I mean, is that satisfactory to some of the concerns you have, Catherine?
Yes, and I think that if there are seats on the committee that are not filled by residents, they should be stated as like a non-residential, can be a non-residential seat. So, and specifically business community or development property owner.
I think they still need to be a Sunny member, which is they have interest in this community, right? So they should probably still be a
Sunny, right, yes,
Sunny
Um,
member.
Sunny
Well-
member, but not necessarily a resident. But I
Resident.
think
Yep.
that seat, it should be called out so that people understand, just from a transparency
I agree.
standpoint, that there may be people that are on the land use committee that don't necessarily live here, even though they are members of Sunny.
All right.
I just had one question. Are there positions on the committee that would be mandatory residents? For example, the chairperson.
Person, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Chair,
Like,
co-chair, yes.
yeah, like,
I think.
you know,
chair-
those right there are mandatory. Some others can be flexible, different positions if you're in a position. It just seems to me that like the chair and the co-chair should, the top ones should be mandatory.
Residents.
I
I agree. So Bobby, that might not be on there, and if it is, or, let's make that clear. I think chair and co-chair, or just any
And-
chair.
And I'm sorry, I don't have the list. I can see some of them there that, is that all of them right there? Just,
Yeah.
that's all of them there. So yeah.
Okay, hold on.
So,
So the general- So
okay, so for Robert's rules, we're gonna do one thing at a time here.
Yeah.
So there's a motion on the floor for this language. Now, several people have brought up amendments we could add to the one I proposed where the chair must be a resident. And we're kind of getting into, should we designate certain ones of these positions open to non-resident or not?
So can I make a motion that we could, because we could put a 3.2, correct?
Yeah,
Instead of having it all in one bullet point, we could, I think we all agree on this, and we could end the discussion on this particular topic for the motion that's on the floor.
okay,
Have a
so
vote.
let's go ahead and just vote on the motion that is on the floor right now. and
Yeah.
just
decide that.
2/3 of this committee must be residents. I think that is an overarching issue. And I think it could be voted on independently of the next set.
Yeah,
Okay, so motion's on the floor. I need a yay or nay for my amendment as it stands in the text box there. Rod,
yay.
Jonathan,
Yay.
Tripti,
Yay.
Mike,
Nay,
nay. I'll say yay. So that's agreed to.
4-1.
Okay, so we can move on to kind of the next round
Well,
of
and
what
I
was
think the next
discussed.
piece is, and I'll put a motion out there, I move that chair, co-chair of land use committee need to be residents.
but if you scroll back up, is that two separate positions? It says chair or co-chair.
So it's in that same,
Same paragraph. So that's two
Yeah.
positions. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's still only 8 positions I can see there. 1, 2, 3.
But
4,
you could have many general members.
8.
Yes.
Right. And so general member, so we should have 3 general members to make it a 9-seat board if we were so inclined.
Mhm.
And remember, we may have 7, we might have 11. We might need a top number, which is what, 13 or 15, because it does get unruly after a while. However, the chair, co-chair is very specific. They're the leads. And on those, we're saying, I'm moving that chair / co-chair must be residents.
I'd
I
second.
move- Okay.
I'll second that.
Okay, so that's a motion on the floor. I'll open it up to discussion on
Yeah,
that motion.
just so because I could see the benefits of having like a business community representative, that position, be a business person that's, that's got some super skills.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I was trying to read through if there's any others that would jump out at me, and I didn't really, other than like, say, the secretary position. Is that still kosher?
Not sure what you're asking, Rod, but I'd
Oh,
like to.
I just meant, is secretary still a politically correct term for?
I'm gonna say it is.
Okay.
If not, you can call it recorder.
Correct.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was like,
But right now, we're talking about chair and co-chair. Any discussion on whether chair, co-chair must be residents? Any discussion on
oh,
that?
I thought we were discussing that there are any other positions that might need to be as well, but
Yeah,
okay.
we got a motion on the floor right now.
Okay.
Any discussion on that before we move to a vote?
Just that I think it probably needs to be 3.7 and not 2.1.
Tell me why. Okay, hold on. Move down to 3.7. If the requirements
Sorry,
of
3.6.
board are in there. Yeah, oh yeah, composition committee. Yeah, I think you're right. It needs to be in
Yeah.
here.
3.5.
I would actually make it 3.1 and move the rest of the 2/3 to 3.2 or make this 3.2.
I think just to keep this simple, it should just be added to 3.1 as a third sentence.
Correct. Go ahead.
Okay, any other discussion?
Do you want to rephrase the motion before we vote?
So yeah, technically Troop D has to amend her own motion.
Okay, so hold on. We never talked, I didn't motion that which provision need to be. What I said was chair and co-chair, chair or co-chair. I move that chair or co-chair of land use committee must be a resident
And add that to 3.1.
and add it to 3.1.
Okay,
It should be chair and co-chair.
And
Thank you.
or co-chair.
And
Or
or
co-
co-chair.
yeah.
I
okay.
think you
And
just,
or.
isn't it just and?
And co-chair. And
Chair.
co-chair. Yeah, Catherine's right. It's and co-chair.
I'm thinking about that.
No, you
It's
can't have or in there.
Yeah, sure.
You can't have or.
And I amend that. I move that chair and co-chair of land use committee must be a resident. And we add this to 3.1 of the bylaws.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Rod,
Aye.
Troop D,
Aye.
Jonathan,
Aye.
Mike, I'll say aye as well, so that's agreed to. Okay.
Catherine, thanks for submitting comments and coming to the call to help us kind of, whittle this down. It's a lot of work and we need all the eyes we can on it.
Definitely. Appreciate all the-
I have two
input.
more comments for this discussion, not related to, I think you guys have covered everything on the representation can I add those comments now?
Oh, okay, so I guess before we get to Catherine, any further comments Catherine has, anything else with, I guess, the composition? Okay, go ahead, Catherine.
Okay, so anywhere that it talks about plans and studies and that the work of the committee is to kind of review things against adopted plans, studies, regulations, that sort of thing. Yeah. So where anything is specifically called out, I would eliminate any specific things because these are bylaws. I
Yep.
think you can say plans, studies, regulations, or other policies adopted by city council. That keeps it very broad. It covers everything. It doesn't get into some questionable ones like that one that was in there that isn't actually adopted by city council. Because adoption by city council really means there has been a very high level, well, not recently, but
In theory.
And very.
there's a high level of neighborhood engagement, notice, participation. There are standards for that. And God willing, we will get a new mayoral administration that brings that back. Sorry, I'm bitter.
Thanks. So I agree with kind of leaving it more generic as just adopted plans or adopted.
I think you need to say adopted by city council.
Okay.
It says that right before that paragraph. So is it enough to just strike what?
Yes.
Oh,
I think so, and I think calling
my
out
suggestion.
what I like about here, but at the same time, it's problematic because it will get dated, right? We're putting in stuff like Blueprint Denver, neighborhood
Yeah.
plan. While I like that, because folks who may not know what these even are, it's great to draw attention to what those are. Maybe, but I think they get old right away. They get old as soon as something's adopted. So, maybe it's more like those adopted plans, such as, for example, but
But not limited to.
yeah, and that's already in there, that it's not limited to it, but how do we maybe?
I don't know if you need that in the bylaws. I mean,
I don't think we need the plan names in the bylaws, because in a year or two, the name will change.
Okay, I'll make a motion to just strike the last sentence of 1.2.
yeah, I mean, if we are going to be promoting those certain things that we feel are good, doing it in the bylaws is not the place to do it. Nobody
Right.
goes and reads these later on.
Yep, I agree. I move to strike the last sentence in 1.2 of the proposed bylaws.
Second.
Okay, further discussion on that point.
Now, are there any other, okay, so we just did that.
It's-
Before we move forward, it's mentioned again in 2.1.
It's in several places, I think.
Do we need to have a discussion about each of these paragraphs, or does the motion is specific enough to remove it in the right places, or can we say, make a
amend.
motion to remove specific language to various documents?
I'll amend my motion. I move to strike specific plan names from our bylaws.
Okay,
Is that specific enough?
yeah, that's fine. Okay, further discussion on that point.
You're very specific about being unspecific, non-specific.
Correct. That's what we're doing here. Because this is what happens when you talk about bylaws.
Okay, let's go ahead and vote on that motion, Rod.
Did somebody I'll second her changed motion.
Okay.
And then
Yes,
yes.
Jonathan,
Yes.
Tripty,
Yes,
Yes,
Mike, okay, I say yes as well, okay.
yeah, let's strike this.
So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to come down here. just strike this portion. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll have to look at this after. this,
Yeah, there might be like
Of course.
prepositional phrases added back in or something.
The part that you just struck, you might say, let's see, citywide planning policy development. Because there are, so some of like the comprehensive plan and Blueprint Denver and the neighborhood plan, typically a city is going to update the comprehensive plan, a full rewrite every 20 years and an update every 10. And
Yeah.
that would be the same for something like Blueprint Denver. And then a neighborhood plan is generally updated every 20 years. So, you know, those are maybe referencing citywide and neighborhood plan updates.
I don't think it's necessary
I
to
guess
put this into our bylaws at all. I think striking any names makes.
no, but Trupti, in this part, this is really like outlining the role of each of those positions. And so participation in any plan, policy, development, or update. So it
Yes,
says,
which is not specific.
yeah, it's non-specific. So, and I think if you just said you've got the highlighted portion right there, citywide planning policy, development, or update. Just
Okay.
add or update.
Okay, I need a motion.
I move to add or update.
Okay, I guess since we're doing this, say I'll second.
Okay, Rod,
Yeah,
Jonathan?
Yay, yay.
Yay.
you can just yell out. Okay, all right.
Nice. Now, are we still working our way down the document for any other references to
I
the?
don't think there are.
I think we're dealing with specific comments that folks either sent us, and Catherine just sent it to us in the last couple of days, which we hadn't talked about at our executive committee. So that's kind of why we're dealing with it now. And I think we incorporated a lot of Bill's concerns in here already at our last executive committee meeting. So unless Bill has sent you additional comments about something, I don't know that we need to rehash any of that either.
I have one more comment that I'd like for you guys to discuss.
Go ahead.
Okay. I do think there needs to be something in the bylaws that a statement about like notification of neighbors about various issues because things are not getting noticed. And the committee is being asked to make decisions on things when appropriate notice hasn't been given. So for example, if we're asked to make any decisions about support for the Fox Park Bridge, they have not done sufficient notice that they had promised to do. And so I think there needs to be, the committee needs to think about what is the appropriate notice that's going to get people to come and participate at the committee meetings so that the committee hears from the residents who are most affected by decisions that are going to be made. So what is that standard for notification? And I think that something like that needs to be put in the bylaws. And maybe if it's not something that can be figured out in the course of this meeting, that there's a placeholder put into the bylaws now for, coming up with what is the appropriate standard for notification that the city, a private developer, some other party needs to do in order to get people to the meetings where you guys are going to be asked to make decisions.
So I'm going to say that I agree with you, but I think the example you're bringing up about the support for 47th Avenue Bridge isn't even something this committee is talking about specifically. I mean,
Well, but Trupti, they were relying on, they basically said the only notice that went out went through the RNO. So they're trying to use the RNO as a shield for not doing their due diligence in terms of notification of the neighborhood. So if there was something in our bylaws that said, whenever Sunnyside is going to be asked to distribute information on behalf of a private developer, a city proposal, whatever,
But
there,
so that's not true. On this one, they mailed on their own. It actually never went through this committee. So
but there
It
are
did, but we know
standards
that didn't
already,
happen.
aren't there? For all developments, there are certain standards. Every project I've ever worked on, like I just did a zoning change, there's a certain number of neighbors that, and the bigger the project, there are I don't know exactly what they are for a development of that size, but there is notification standards, I believe, already, isn't there? I mean, maybe I'm
Just,
wrong.
I mean,
with the city,
to be
Yeah.
fair though, this is, I mean, I appreciate the comment and I think it's relevant, but I think it's outside the bounds of this committee. We have, I mean, it's not our responsibility to notify anyone. I mean, if we
No,
want to
no,
take
no,
it up
no,
with the
no, not
city.
at all. No, I don't think Catherine was saying that. She was
Okay,
saying-
okay, folks, we're gonna do this one at a time
Okay.
and in order. Mr. DeBelle has the floor. Go ahead and finish, Mike.
Sorry, Mike.
No, that's no problem. I think that we, we need to just stay within the context of what this committee is responsible for and what they can do, especially when it pertains to the bylaws. We're talking about the bylaws for this land use committee. We're not talking about the bylaws for the city of Denver for notification. And are we required, are we going to make ourselves required to notify residents? I mean, we don't have the budget or the manpower to do that.
no.
No, I
That's not
don't
what
think
I-
Catherine was going that way, and she can
No.
probably speak. I interpreted it that we wouldn't be able to take an action
Here,
on something we were being asked to take an action on until they proved to us that they had done all of the notifications that they were required to do. Not that we would do any notifications, and just so that they can't abscond with our committee and say that
Correct.
they met the requirements by just using our name. So that was it. I'm sorry, Catherine, I just thought that was what you were trying to
I know,
imply.
that's what I was trying to say.
and so what I will add is that when something is in front of this committee, for instance, a rezone, one of the things that we're doing is that we're asking the developer to do notification to their neighbors if they hadn't already, and that conversation about this project with the neighbors is at the next land use meeting. So if they came to us today saying, we want to do this, our thing would be, great, let's invite all your neighbors to the next month's meeting where we can hear from all of them and you can talk about what you're doing and we can hear their concerns. Now, in this very specific context of what Catherine was talking about, the example she gave with Fox Park isn't actually working through us in a sense. That does not mean they're not trying to hide behind, we're working through your R&O, but our R&O right now is not looking at doing any approvals at all. And we do know that they did send out, however, I never got mine. There are people who didn't get theirs.
When you asked them that question at the meeting, they said that they gave the notice to you, that they didn't do any mailings.
No, they did
That
mail.
no, they said they didn't. They said the
11,000 mailings is what they did. The issue is there are a lot of us who either didn't get it in time or it came late or didn't get it at all. That's a different issue. But the mailings were done by them. And they apparently did do them. However,
In Sunnyside, or is that just all their
Sunnyside,
mailings?
Chaffee, and Gloville, they did 3 neighborhoods with mailings for these 3 meetings that they were having specific to this bridge and the study. But there's a lot of other problems. But Catherine, I get where you're going with this. Mike, I also understand what you're saying is we can't dictate all of it, but to the extent that something comes to us, we will ask for notification to your neighbors before we make a decision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if, I mean, we can just say, look, we're not going to make a decision on anything until you prove to us you've made it. And that shields us as a committee, I think, immediately, because, and protects us from having to send out notifications. Like,
And we won't.
we won't. Yeah.
We say you do it. Here's
Right.
our next call, and we want this call information on your notification so that basically what we're saying is you tell everybody where they can come and address their concerns when you're talking about this project. It'll be at the next land use. We have been doing it. Of course, this is something we just started. It's never been something this group has ever done, but we are kind of doing that. However, this Fox Park thing is a little different than, let's say, any other rezone where the RNO is overseeing kind of the aspect of RNO approval or opposition or support. And at least in that respect, we are doing those things. But we cannot be in charge of every notification that anybody ever does or doesn't do that impacts our neighborhood or may come to us. However, if it's a may come to us, we could ask that notification has been done and that here's the meeting where everybody can come to discuss. I think that's fair. I think we are already doing that. But Catherine, to your point, like what's not clear in that piece?
And maybe you're doing standard operating procedures separate from the bylaws.
And we should.
But maybe some sort of reference that there are standard operating procedures so that somebody who is reading through the bylaws understands that there is, there's some structure around the operations. And I think that's important to state in the bylaws. Even if you don't state what that structure is, that you reference it as an appendix document or, something, appended to the bylaws.
And actually, I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm sharing a document here. This is kind of basically a standard operating procedures draft in the works that kind of addresses a lot of what we're talking about here, which meeting it would be at, when you would get notified, how many far out you got to notify, things like that. Our problem is that we don't have this document finalized. That's way further down the road.
Mhm.
So it's kind of unclear. I mean, we could say it in here, but we haven't done anything with it yet. So, I mean, it's kind of putting
Do
the
we
cart
have
before the
reference
horse.
to, are we referencing that there will be and that there is SOPs with the specifics on stuff? Do we say that in our bylaws that we will have standard operating procedures? I think that in itself may be an amendment, which is that detail and specifics about our operations would be in standard operating procedures. I mean, that's just, if we need to.
I mean, you do have in the bylaws, information about voting. The standard operating procedures, you may want to have something that talks about how those are updated or used by the committee. I think, and maybe right now you just put a placeholder for standard operating procedures. Because, if you want to update them, how does that work?
I would be willing to do this, add 4.6 under the voting section and say standard operating procedures may be amended by a majority vote. And that references standard operating procedures,
Mhm.
even though we haven't necessarily created it yet.
we're already at 8:05, 8:06. I think that's already right past our
Yeah.
meeting.
So,
Just calling time on this.
sorry, I have lost track of time.
Yeah.
Okay, folks. I think we're gonna have to delay a final vote yet another month here. So, yeah, we're over time, but we need to let people go. So I'm gonna go ahead and table everything and ask for, is there any other comments besides land use bylaws for the meeting in general that we needed to address before we adjourn?
No, I had a couple of things I wanted to bring up, but they're not timely, so I'll bring them up next time.
Okay, well, with that, I will request a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay.
Or wait, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Okay, so that's agreed to. We will see you all next month. Thank you very much, everyone.
Goodbye, all.
Thank
Good to see
you.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.